Hello and welcome to the programme where British journalists debate the week's news with the correspondents who write, blog, podcast and broadcast from the Dateline London. Living with double-digit inflation is an unwelcome if familiar experience in many countries. Turkey, Argentina, Zimbabwe and Iran all started 2022 under that yoke. For the British, it had been a distant memory, but not anymore. In the United States, President Joe Biden signed into law the optimistically titled Inflation Reduction Act. Would it were that simple? Another bad memory from the 1980s, the threat to kill the author Sir Salman Rushdie came close to being fulfilled last Friday. Liberals are relieved he survived, but have they helped to fuel intolerance? To discuss all that in the studio are Maria Margaronis, a documentary maker who, among other projects, has charted the crises, financial and environmental, which have afflicted Greece. Henry Chu is part of the editorial team at the Los Angeles Times, as well as being its London correspondent. And Abdel Bari Atwan is a specialist in the politics of the Middle East and runs the news website Rai Al-Yum. Welcome to you all. Lovely to have you with me again in the studio now. Let's start with what's happening in the UK. Maria, you've reported on how a nation can be kind of atomised by the extraordinary impact of rising inflation and people's efforts merely to survive day to day, often because of economic forces well beyond their control. What do you fear for Britain over the coming months and years?
Well, first of all, people are going to suffer. People are going to be, if energy prices are not capped, because we're now predicting that they might be up to over £4,000 a year, it's going to be beyond choosing between heating and eating. It's going to be not heating and not eating. A number of NHS leaders spoke out this morning and said it's going to be severe health consequences because of this. I mean, people suffer horribly, both physically and mentally. During the Greek crisis, which is what you were referring to, there was a very steep rise in the suicide rate. It's awful. I mean, to be in that anxiety about, you know, not just can you go out, but, you know, can you eat, can you feed your kids? It's terrible, it's corrosive, and it's very polarizing in a society as well, because it sets people against each other. And it's politically polarising as well.
Are there any lessons from what Greece went through in terms of how political leaders should try to kind of steel people for what's coming? Because in a sense, one got the impression in Greece that it caught them completely unawares. And to be fair, there were different circumstances.
It's a very different circumstance. But it's not, at this point, you know, we don't just have to steel people. We do have the opportunity to do something about it. Right? I mean, there are options on the table about capping energy prices, but there's a much longer term project that has to be put into play as well, because what's hitting this country so hard is not just the current external influences, it's chronic lack of investment in public services. I think public investment in Britain was just 5 or 6 years ago, 34th out of 36 measured by the OECD. So railways are falling apart, the water's falling apart, the NHS is falling apart. These things need to be dealt with. And in the meantime, everything possible needs to be done to protect the most vulnerable.
Henry, the situation is not as acute in the United States as it is predicted to be here, at least at the moment. But how are pocketbook issues affecting Americans already?
Well, I wouldn't say it's not necessarily as acute. Certainly some segments of society, as here as there, are going to be insulated. But then we just had a poll in my home state of California that showed that over a majority of people said that they had experienced moderate hardship already, and in particularly from the rise in gas prices, which for Americans and those in California and Texas really hit the pocketbook. Now, that's gone down, and there looks to be some relief on the horizon in California. There are tax relief for filling up your tank at the petrol station. But it's still something that is hitting a wide swath of people and is happening here, disproportionately hitting, for example, people of color, those who are already struggling to get by, who were hit worse by the pandemic than those who are in better shape, are also getting pretty badly hit by this rise in prices. We didn't hit the double digits of inflation as you did here, and it is going down, but it's not going to go down enough for people to be feeling much relief, certainly within the next few months, and also in terms of politics by the time that midterm elections come around in the US. That's really going to be on people's minds when they go into the voting booth.
Just on that bit of legislation, the Inflation Reduction Act, is there much inflation reduction envisaged in this act, or is it a good title for an omnibus bill?
It is kind of a misleading title in the sense that that was not its aim. The aim, of course, was to try to tackle climate change, also other social issues such as drug prices. Now, I think most, or many, I should say, economists have said that there is some built-in inflation reduction in it over the medium to long term. But in democracies, where we're dealing with elections, that come around much more quickly than we ever expect, that's going to be difficult for the Democrats who have passed this package to really show that there's been much reduction in prices going up. So the Inflation Reduction Act is not totally a misnomer, but it's over a longer period of time when we see drug prices going down, when we see deficit reduction and money being pulled out of the economy, and also a move towards renewable sources of energy that will not then therefore show big price rises in gas and oil.
Abdul Barry, just over a decade ago, basic economic questions were at the heart of the revolutions that became known as the Arab Spring. Now, I'm not certainly suggesting anything similar would happen in Europe or the United States, perhaps, but nonetheless, it's probably worth reminding people how fundamental things like being able to afford to eat, about feeling that the taxation system was unfair, actually destabilised regimes that had existed for decades almost unchallenged.
Sean, this is an excellent question because, to be honest, we are on the edge of Arab food spring simply because the price is shooting up and the people, poorer people, who are really suffering from this. Yani we are talking about 10% here, 10.3 in London or in Britain, but when you look at a country like Turkey, it is 82% the inflation rate there. So a month ago, I was in Lebanon, and I went to a well-known restaurant in, Hamra, which is like Oxford Street or a nice bridge.
Yeah.
And I was, shocked. The owner recognized me and said, "Sorry, Mr. Atwan, we don't have bread." Seriously. And people said, "What, bread? We don't have bread?" So, in Middle East, bread is essential. It's not like here you can do with roast potato, you can do with chips.
Yes.
But there you have to have bread, because of hummus and food. Anyway, so now the queues in Egypt, in Lebanon, for bread is huge. People are digging on the dustbin, on rubbish bin in order to look for food. There are famine spreading, and there are a lot of alarming signs because of this. So I expect a lot of problems. Now, the prices of wheat, the prices of grain is going up because of Ukraine problems. And those people are suffering. They cannot, the governments are nearly bankrupt. So in Lebanon now, it is bankruptcy. It could be in Egypt, it could be in Jordan, it could be in Sudan, it could be other parts of the Middle East. So the Middle East is really on the edge of starvation. They have corruption, they have, the currency is falling down, the prices is going up, energy prices is going up, food prices going up, everything is going up, and people suffering there. So the name of the game is, it could be Arab food spring very soon.
Maria, you mentioned that there are various proposals for capping energy prices.
Yes.
The British Labour Party, the opposition,
Yes.
Keir Starmer, came up with one. He said it would have an impact on inflation, and the experts seem to agree it would, but it's only a 6-month plan.
Yes, again, it's a short-term plan. It's a short-term plan, and then, a longer-term plan is the Labour Party plan to connect the minimum wage to the cost of living, which seems like a very reasonable thing to do, but we definitely need a longer term strategy. And you were saying, Henry, about the Inflation Reduction Bill was partly aimed at climate change. Well, the Green New Deal, which is again part of the Labour Party, his plan seems to be a more sustainable, in both senses, a way of going forward with this. I'm not very good at economics at all. I have not a clue how these things work. No. But it just seems to me that if we're going to try and rebuild infrastructure and move forward in a way that makes sense on all the threats facing us at the moment, that's the way to go.
Now, I hate to mention infrastructure in the context of Donald Trump's presidency, but it was one of the things he expressed a lot of passion about when he was president, and he is still the man to beat, it looks like, on paper. I mean, I just wonder, in the light of Liz Cheney's defeat in the Republican nomination and in the Republican primaries in Wyoming, whether that is being echoed in other selections? Is it still looking like Donald Trump's party?
Well, first of all, on the question of infrastructure, that wasn't just a Trump thing. Actually, the Biden administration also had a very large infrastructure bill trying to improve public works across the U.S. But your question about Donald Trump and the Republican Party, I think after what we just saw with Cheney's loss, and also the fact that of the few Republicans who actually voted to impeach him that second time, all but 2 of them are now out. Either they've decided to remove themselves from public life or they've been voted out. So it really shows the grip he still has on this party. Now, this search of his Mar-a-Lago home, people are wondering whether that's going to have a backfiring effect where it actually increases support for him, or whether it's going to show him up for being someone who still does not respect the rule of law and thinks of himself above it. In the U.S., I think everybody has in their partisan contact lenses that they view everything with. So if you're someone who is already anti-Trump, this is just another sign of why he should not be allowed back in the Oval Office. But if you're for Trump, and it has now become a party where it's about the worship of a leader as opposed to necessarily the policies, it's further proof that he is someone who is being unfairly persecuted by an establishment that cannot deal with somebody who's from the outside. So it still is another polarizing factor, but it is a little bit dangerous, I will say, for the Republican Party, which bills itself as the party of law and order, to suddenly be attacking the FBI and even some saying defund the FBI. That's a little bit of a shaky ground for Republicans to be on.
Barry, there's been lots of speculation over the documents that were seized at Mar-a-Lago by the FBI. Top secret documents, there's been a reference to nuclear, nobody's quite clear what it is. There are lots of rumours circulating in the American press about that.
Yeah, in the Middle East now, a lot of speculation, a lot of rumors that actually President Trump, when he was president, when he was in the White House, he, wanted to give the know-how, the experience to the Saudi Arabia, how to use nuclear power to generate electricity. And it seems there are, as the speculation saying, or the rumors saying that, there are a lot of secrets about that. So these documents could be related to this cooperation between Trump and the Saudi Arabia, especially the Crown Prince, the de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia, is really maintaining a very, very good relation with Trump family and with Trump himself, and also his son-in-law, which is Jared Kushner. So we don't know yet. As I said, I have to say it again, it is rumors and speculation. So we are waiting to see what kind of documents there, and whether it is actually will expose this kind of relationship. We know, for example, Saudi Arabia in bad terms with Biden, with the Democrats in general. So there are rumors also saying that maybe the Democrats would like to use these documents against Saudi Arabia, who humiliated President Biden when he visited Saudi Arabia.
His recent visit when he was
they never actually accepted
his
demands to raise the production of oil in order to bring the inflation, to bring the prices of energy down in the United States and Europe.
But I'm glad, though, Barry, that you talk about it, or emphasize the fact that it is speculation. No one knows what's in these documents right now, except for Trump and his advisors, and those who have
Trump
actually...
may not know. I mean, apparently he used to walk around the White House with a valet carrying, boxes of stuff, going, this is my stuff, this is my stuff. I mean, this weird combination of a 6-year-old child and a maniacal... Anyway.
And we may never know.
In my opinion, yes.
Even with the affidavit by the Justice Department that might be released, that would only be portions, and some of it will be redacted. So if it really is about national security, those of us probably will never find out what's precisely in those documents.
It's quite interesting, though, isn't it? Because when we all dug into this during the course of this week and this story, Newsweek appears to be the source of the principal concerns. But Newsweek then says, well, it doesn't know, it's quite honest about it, but it says there was this report made by the House Oversight Committee, published in February 2019, which basically accused the administration what it said was that strong private commercial interests have been pressing aggressively for the transfer of highly sensitive nuclear technology to Saudi Arabia, which posed, in its view, a potential risk to US national security absent of adequate safeguards. I mean, in a sense, it's perhaps no great surprise that Saudi Arabia would want this technology, given it knows that being an oil economy is longer term.
Absolutely. But then you get the next step down the line, which is Saudi Arabia's enmity with Iran, and this, we've got two countries with nuclear power claiming that they're not using it to develop nuclear weapons, and what's going on?
Yeah, Henry.
Yeah, I think with that Oversight Committee report that's been out in the public domain now for 3 years, this is not any kind of mystery that Saudi Arabia and other countries, not just Saudi Arabia, do want nuclear technology. It's whether President Trump actually passed any of the secrets along, and that we don't know, and that will remain speculation.
And I suppose in a sense it's understandable that the FBI would be resisting so strongly efforts to give full details of its investigation, which having kind of unsealed the warrants, there's now pressure from some to unseal, including from the media, to unseal the whole basis of the investigation.
Well, media, of course, what we want is transparency in all respects. The FBI has its procedures, and so does the Department of Justice, which they want to adhere to with President Trump now as a normal citizen, as they do with any other normal citizen. Granted, he has protections, he has certain benefits that come with having been president, but he is still also under the rule of law, as are the rest of us. And so that also means protections from law, so that certain things aren't revealed about you that should not be prematurely.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But it's not illegal for example, the American administration to give help to ally like Saudi Arabia, help in the nuclear peaceful means. I mean, so we know that there is a huge competition between Saudi Arabia now and Iran, and the Saudi would like to have this clean energy, as they call it, and produce it like many people. So I believe, I don't know why the administration is shy of telling the truth about it. It is not a nuclear power for actually producing nuclear weapon. No, it is only for peaceful means. So
but it's not necessarily a very big step from nuclear power technology and then getting eventually to a nuclear weapon. And that's precisely why there was an agreement about Iran to begin with. So.
Well, I'm just going to say, but I mean, again, this is all speculation, but the administration might be shy about revealing it because of the kickbacks, because of possible kickbacks that were received, and also because of, Trump had a habit all along of kind of acting off his own bat and, meeting with Putin and not having any notes or things like that. So that's the issue.
Yeah, and obviously if there were, what we don't know if there has been a relationship, if this has happened, but it's something that the FBI would doubtless be looking at if there's any substance to it. Let's turn to this other question, which has kind of focused all our minds, not least as journalists, and that's what happened to Salman Rushdie last Friday when he was knifed repeatedly by a man who attacked him at a literary festival. And there's been lots of discussion over not only over the context for Salman Rushdie himself, still subject to this fatwa apparently imposed by the late Ayatollah Khomeini, the spiritual leader of Iran, for the publication of the book The Satanic Verses, which the Iranian government has distanced itself from, but nonetheless it has then gone on to blame Sir Salman for what happened to him. Maria, first of all, what are your thoughts on that incident? And what it may or might not tell us about our tolerance of the freedom of expression?
Well, obviously it was terrible. I mean, horrifying and kind of like this kind of return of the repressed in some awful way, like the end of a dark fairy story where fate catches up. It was shocking and surprising and awful. I do think that there are many different kinds of threat to free expression, and I wouldn't want to confuse the knifing of a writer with a kind of consensus about what's acceptable and not acceptable to say in a way that doesn't involve violence or actual censorship. Now, there's a lot to be said about this. I mean, we are in this moment where there's this thing going on called cancel culture and all of that, and sometimes words are given an importance which doesn't take into account their context or the situation in which they're used. And there's this kind of great rise in identity politics in the United States, which often seems to me to be partly a sort of defensive move, but also an inability to engage in a broader way with social and political issues. But I do think that, religious fanaticism and a sense of a shifting consensus about what's acceptable and not acceptable to say or talk about are two different things.
And of course, it's not just the U.S., though, that's dealing
No,
with cancel
you're
culture.
absolutely
We
right,
might be
Henry.
leading
Yes.
the way, as we do in so many areas, but it certainly has come to this country as well.
Yes.
Yeah, and freedom of expression is a cudgel that each side has happily taken
Yes.
up at various times throughout even these last few decades, to beat the other side with. So it was certainly popular amongst liberals to beat up on conservatives, saying that they were not allowing for proper debate, or that they were using language that was deliberately insulting and gratuitously provocative. But then now you have conservatives who are saying the same thing about liberals, that they're not allowing for proper argument to take place. But let's also remember, though, that these same conservatives in some states like Florida are disallowing curriculums about different sexual orientations or about race theory.
Totally.
So there's a lot of blame that can be spread fairly widely on this issue, but it does show that we are at a moment that expressing what you believe and the way in which you do so is really coming under scrutiny, and it's hard to find those lines to draw.
Antibody, you work in a region where this whole debate about, for us it's a passionate discussion, but it's not for most, thank God, it is not a life or death issue, but it can be in parts of the Middle East and has been repeatedly.
It's not only the Middle East. There are 2 billion Muslim people all over the world. We should differentiate between them and Europe and the Western world in particular. They have a feeling there. About 90% of the people in the Muslim world believe that freedom of expression practiced only to insult Muslims. You have the problem with the cartoons, offensive cartoons toward Prophet Muhammad. Now these kind of certain verses actually is blasphemy completely, and it is offensive. Salman Rushdie, he was very, very cruel when he talked about Prophet Muhammad and his wives, and to talk about the wives of the Prophet is really very, very dangerous thing. People, I believe 95% of the people never read the satanic verses. I was here when it was published in this country 40 years ago. There were demonstrations all over the Muslim world, and many people were killed. And again, when the cartoons, offensive cartoons from the Scandinavian newspaper, actually, again, there was a huge demonstration against this, and many people were killed again. So it is a dilemma here. People are asking why there are people in the West, in particular, specializing in offending the 2 billion Muslims all over the world. They can express themselves the way they like, but leave our Prophet alone. You shouldn't actually talk about him. I have read the satanic verses a long time ago. It is very difficult for ordinary people to understand it. It's whether it's in English or in Arabic, but few Arabic or other languages was publishing it, simply because it wasn't allowed to be translated and published. If a publishing organization published this translation of it in the Arab world, it would be banned.
And of course, around the world, one translator was murdered, a publisher was attacked.
Norwegian publisher attacked.
Definitely there are people, secular people in the Arab world, the Muslim world, who are against these kind of crimes, to attack an author simply because he expressed himself in a way in a novel or something like that. And those people actually also, they are harassed by, even attacked by radical Muslims. And this fatwa by Khomeini, it was about 40 years ago. Now, why they revived it? Why this young man go and this?
And of course, we won't know that until his trial, if we ever know it. Maria, I was just going to quote you what the British journalist, we've only got about a minute or so left, Matthew Syed wrote in the Sunday Times, where he accused Liberals over 30 years of having worked as the de facto accomplices of the Ayatollah, because he said they were assisting in the task of dismantling free speech. What did you make of that?
Oh, I'm sorry, I think that's rubbish. As Henry said, it's not just Liberals, and every side is using, wanting the, well, I disagree. But also, I think just to throw out something at the very, very end, what's most worrying to me is how difficult it is to know what we hear is true and what is not at the moment. That this kind of, that speech itself has become not just contested, but unreliable. And that is, to me, almost more worrying than attacks on freedom of speech.
And I hope that is something we do here, and for our remaining few weeks on air, that we will continue to do so. Miriam Margolis, Abdelbari Atwan, Henry Chu, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your company. Dateline is back at the same time next week. I would just say, try to remember that magic word we all sometimes forget, empathy. Goodbye.